Hey everybody, JP here, and I have been really pumped to make this video for about 2 months, ever since I got my Jerry Jones 6-string bass. Very similar to the one Hetfield played on Sad But True, as seen in A Year and a Half in the Life of Metallica. I was pretty stoked that that just happened to be the model I got a good deal on, so that worked out well. Before we get into the sounds, I do want to talk a little bit about the history of the instrument and in particular the name. A lot of people refer to these as baritone guitars, including Hetfield himself, who called it that in many interviews. And I think that's why a lot of Metallica fans call them baritones. But technically, that's not accurate. A baritone is tuned in between a standard electric guitar and bass. So usually a fourth down to B or a fifth down to A. And the scale length falls somewhere in the middle of that as well. The original Danelectro 6-string bass came out in 1956, 30-inch scale length, which put it almost exactly in between the Fender guitar and bass of the era, but tuned a full octave down from a standard guitar. And the whole idea behind this was that the Fender bass was still kind of finding its place. It was still almost like a niche instrument, where you had upright bassists who had dominated pop music for decades at that point, you know, jazz, blues, country, and so on. They were a little reluctant to switch over to this new electric instrument. And the electric guitar was growing in popularity, by the day, it seemed. So everybody wanted to play guitar. In fact, I have a picture of one of my father's first bands somewhere around 1960, and there's 3 guitar players and no bassist in the band. So eventually my dad switched to bass, but that wasn't until like 1965. So it was definitely still in its growing stages. So Danelectro had this idea of coming out with something tuned as low as a bass, but easier for a guitarist to pick up and play, thinking, that it might catch on more in bands. So the 6-string bass was born and really gained some popularity in country music for tic-tac bass playing. You could hear it in a lot of spaghetti western soundtracks. A lot of Hollywood film scores. A lot of times you'd have an upright bassist and a Danelectro bass playing together. In some cases, a Danelectro bass and a Fender bass together. So a lot of fun things used mostly in the studio with them. I think I may do a deeper dive into the history of the instrument because it is pretty awesome. But I know you guys want to get to the goods here. So first, what's the difference between a Jerry Jones 6-string bass and a Danelectro 6-string bass? About 20 years and much higher quality. So the Danelectro instruments from the 50s and 60s were very much beginners' instruments. They were not made well. They were made to be cheaper than Fenders and sold to more beginner-type players. Danelectro went out of business 1969, and a fellow named Jerry Jones, not to be confused with the Cowboys' infamous owner, Jerry Jones the luthier in the Nashville area, was doing repairs and custom builds for some of the biggest names in Nashville at the time. In fact, Merle Haggard's main guitar was built by Jerry Jones back then. He found himself doing a lot of repairs on these old Danelectro instruments because country guitarists like the twangy sound, particularly the 6-string bass. So someone commissioned him to build a higher quality version of these instruments. And he sought to it, in fact, going as far as making his own lipstick pickups, which are considered some of the best ever made. He kind of took the original Danelectro formula and just kind of beefed them up all around, which can be said of the instruments as a whole. Everything about them is more durable, more reliable, a little easier to play, just overall improvement in quality from what Danelectro was doing. And frankly, from the reissues now too, although the reissues have come a long way. Jerry Jones was really making something that was a cut above. Granted, they cost more, 2 to 3 times as much, but I would say 100% worth it. Also, little known fact, Jerry Jones made the electric sitar that James played on Wherever I May Roam. The choral electric sitar. The original was a collaboration between Danelectro and guitarist Vinnie Bell. And remember the name Vinnie Bell. We're going to talk about him in a future video because he played the tremolo guitar parts on Black Lodge from Anthrax. And there's a lot of history of him with the 6-string bass as well as the electric sitar. So Jerry Jones bought the trademark to choral instruments. And I'm not sure if choral made anything but the electric sitar. They may have, but he bought the rights to the name and reproduced a improved version of that electric sitar. And in that picture of James and Kirk with all the instruments they used on the Black album, You can see it there. It's really tough to tell in that picture, but it is in fact the Jerry Jones version. So I thought that was pretty awesome. And Jerry did create his own baritone version of the Bass 6. It was a 28-inch scale that was designed to be tuned to low B or low A, and also intonated a bit better, which was a concern for a lot of the Nashville studio guys. They didn't necessarily need to go a full octave down all the time, so they prefer to have an instrument that was maybe a little higher, but still had that deep twang to it and could intonate a little better for recording. So make no mistake, it was the popularity of the Jerry Jones guitars that really led to another company acquiring the Danelectro name and reissuing all of their old models, albeit produced overseas. In fact, there was even a lawsuit. I guess the new Danelectro claimed to have the rights to the headstock design, which Jerry had been using, without a problem for over a decade at that point. But suddenly between that and dealing with a market that was flooded with imports for a quarter of the price of his handmade instruments, it became a real struggle. And Jerry ultimately closed shop at about 2010. But Jerry's instruments really are modern classics. You'll see them going for a lot of money, especially in the Nashville area. If you want one, I encourage you to be patient and shop around. And, you could find one for a fair price, but they still are much more valuable than the newer reissue Danelectros for sure. Now, let's get to the Metallica stuff. I have two examples for comparison here. I have the actual clip from the documentary. Now, bear in mind, that's being recorded by the microphone on a video recorder. So that's a combination of what's coming out of the monitors in the control room, the acoustic sounds of the instrument as James plays it, and so on. So not very accurate. The other thing we have here is the stem of the bass from the actual album. And as you can hear, the 6-string bass was mixed in with it in the stem. So that's how it sits in the final mix. It's mono, just like the bass, right down the middle. And these are our two best examples for comparison. So, to go about this endeavor, where to begin, right? First, I tried it through the Mark IV settings that we used for James's guitar. If you want to go back and check out the Sad But True guitar video we did a few months back, I thought the Mark IV would have the best low end to handle this. And it doesn't sound bad. But I just didn't think it sounded like it does on the album. Right? Hearing it through the Mark IV settings, it sounded good, but it didn't really have that sort of like speaker cone paper tearing sound to it that I hear in the original. So I'm watching 1.5 years and I'm observing in the control room that there are no guitar amps to be seen. The only things you can see in that control room are Jason's bass amps. There's his live rig in the back with the Trace Elliots and the Crown Power amps, and there's a stack of heads in the control room with a Mesa 400 Plus on top, and then a couple of SVTs. It looks like a vintage SVT and a rack mount, probably an SVT2 or whatever they called the rack mount model around that time. So got me thinking that maybe James played this through Jason's rig. Now, none of those amps would have enough gain to give us this sound, so something else had to be used for gain, right? So I thought, well, what was Jason using for overdrive distortion on his bass rig then, at least live? And it was the original SansAmp pedal. It was, now we call it the SansAmp Classic, but back then it was the only SansAmp. So Jason was using that live. I don't know that he used it in the studio at all. There's like one little part on Wherever I May Roam where he uses the wah pedal and he might have the distortion on as well. But otherwise, I've never really heard any talk of him using it on the Black Album. Anyhow, I got to thinking, well, why don't we try some SansAmp? So that is the PSA-1 plugin. I kept it simple for this. I just grabbed the one I've been using for 25 years and dialed in what I thought was pretty good sound. And it's going through our Mesa 400 Plus model. Actually, the Cali 400 Channel 1 here in Helix Native. And that's actually what the Danelectro sounds with nothing. I do have a little bit of a gate on it, just to keep it clean, just to keep it tight. But yeah, that's what it sounds like with no amp or no SansAmp. And that's through the 400. And that's with the SansAmp. And the SansAmp through a bass amp was actually something, I can't remember where I picked it up from, if it was something I read or something that somebody told me about. But back in like the late 90s, early 2000s, this was a cool way to go for some of those low guttural kind of nu metal guitar sounds that were happening a lot back then. In fact, it reminded me of some of the tones from Sepultura's Roots album, which I always loved. I kind of hate even calling that a nu metal album because that genre kind of homogenized itself into something completely different within a few years. And that album is still really special to me. It's one of my lawnmower albums, put on my earbuds when I'm outside doing the yard work, and always love it. So, cool, sounds good, but it's still not... right? Or... hey! So, yeah, not 100%, but we're in the ballpark, right? So then I'm thinking, what else could they have possibly used for this? We know that there was a Distortion Plus, an MXR Distortion Plus in the studio because James used it for his lead on My Friend in Misery, direct into the console. I don't have a Distortion Plus in my arsenal here, and I couldn't find any good plugins of it. There's a free one for PC, but I'm on a Mac, so I couldn't use that. So I thought, hey, why don't we try a Ratt? I mean, we know that James used a Ratt all the way back in the Kill 'Em All days, right? So I tried this Numbrini Black plugin through the Brainworks SVT. And what do you know? I'm getting that speaker tearing sound that I couldn't quite get with either the SansAmp or the Mark IV. Right? So, I think we're closer. And a big part of this is actually boosting the mid-range like crazy. I'm in the third position, which is, I believe, up around like 1.5K. And that's a range that James traditionally cut from his rhythm guitar tone. But we know Jason used a lot of it on his bass tone. And this sound certainly has a lot of it in it. See, if I back that off, it changes considerably. And a little bit of treble from here, too. Another interesting thing here is that I have the bass on ultra low. And so if I change it... really ugly, right? But ultra low really works with this sound. And as for cabs, I'm on an 8x10 with 57s. I believe this is the same cab I used for Jason's bass sound in that video. And as far as the Ratt goes, well, that's the MPEG by itself. I'm just cranking the drive, cranking the level, and the filter. This would be the brightest sound on the filter. As you turn it, it actually cuts treble. So, all in all, I was thrilled with the way this sounded, but it still didn't have the bottom that I wanted. It didn't have nearly as much bottom as... Hey! Now, it's tough to tell how much bottom is actually in the album sound because the bass is in there too. But it seems like quite a bit. So then I just figured I would try that and the SansAmp together. And there it is. What a sound. These are the guitars by themselves, the guitars that I recreated. Without. With. Of course, Hetfield played them a lot tighter than I did, but I'm sure you still get the point, right? So, yeah, I was thrilled to have landed on this sound and also to stumbled on it in such a random way. But then it got me thinking. In Hetfield's live rig from around the time of Saint Anger up until they switched to Axe Effects, which I think was like 2013 or so, for about 10 years, he had a gold Line 6 DM4 distortion modeler in his rig. No idea what it was set to, and even if you could see the controls, of course, you know, you still can't tell what the preset is set to, right? So always wondered what the heck he was using that for. I mean, we know he got it around the time they were making Saint Anger. That's when the pedal was released, actually. And a lot of speculation that, you know, he was using that to tighten up some of the extreme lows on the baritone guitars and detuned standard guitars on that album. But it was labeled sad, and there was a comment I saw somewhere. I couldn't find it, and if I ever do, I'll link it in the description. But I believe James Tech, Chad, had mentioned that there was a boost used for Sad But True, and that was different than his lead boost, which was the Klon. You know, he'd been using the Klon in there since like the late 90s for his lead tone. So this was separate from that. And a lot of people speculated he was using the sub-octave fuzz on it to give like a lower frequency sound. I always assume those are people who maybe never actually tried that patch, because that particular patch really sounds way more something like Jack White or maybe like CKY would use, or even like an MXR Blue Box. Can't really play more than a couple notes through it. It gets really weird, kind of like a ring mod, you know, where you have two overtones clashing with each other. Cool effect for some things, not something I think James would use, and it certainly doesn't sound like it. And besides, if James just wanted to add a lower octave to his sound, there are way better pedals to do it with. The whammy pedal probably would have been the first choice. The Electro Harmonics based microsynth, which James had in his rig at one point in time, for Memory Remains. Those are all better options than a fuzz pedal would be. But it got me thinking that, you know, that has a Ratt model built into it. Why would he be using the DM4 for a Ratt instead of an actual Ratt? Well, the DM4 adds bass and treble controls. So you still have the filter control, but you've got additional bass and treble. So I'm guessing James maybe beefed up the low end for those low tunings. Or maybe he found that the lower tunings could be a little floppy and he wanted to tighten them up by cutting some bass, kind of like, you know, a lot of the gent guys do. So I tried to listen to as many live versions of Sad But True as I could find from the time period that we know that rig would be from. So basically Saint Anger Tour and the Death Magnetic Tour. And I can't really hear a noticeable difference in his tone. Certainly not as noticeable as the sub-octave fuzz would make it. So I'm thinking maybe it does add a little more grind to it. Maybe it does tighten up the low end. I'd love any sort of confirmation on that we could get. And of course, now that they've switched to Axe Effects, I don't think we'll ever know what he's using these days on it, unless either he or Chad comes out and tells us. That's probably as close as we're going to get on there. But yeah, very happy with this tone. The first time I combined that Ratt through the Ampeg with the SansAmp through the Mesa, my eyes just lit up, and I really felt like I nailed it. So I hope you guys think so too. Please let me know. And I'll be back. I want to do a lot more stuff with the Jerry Jones 6-string bass, including how Dave Jordan used it, in particular with Anthrax on some of the Sound of White Noise tracks, and also more of the really cool history of that. So I'll probably do a video combining those things pretty soon. So yeah, please like, comment, subscribe, all that great stuff. I love hearing from you guys, and let me know what you think. All right, until next time, take care.